Are you looking for an anthurium with large dramatic leaves that will grow super fast? Have I got the review for you? Stick around with me and let's look into it. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me and in front of me today in massive size. It's tropical houseplants. So today is a continuation of the plant review series because, I couldn't not review this plant because, a head test on this newest leaf is just bonkers. But yes, today is going to be a review of the Anthurium nigrolaminum, I think it's how it's pronounced, nigrolaminum Gigi. And I know this is a plant that a lot of people are looking for. And this is stonking ridiculous. It just keeps getting larger and larger, and I'm surprised. I want to see where it's going to max out because this is stupid. But yes, let's actually dive into the background for this plant. So the background in this plant in terms of me, and let me show you my plant. Oh, and it's not dripping wet for one time. Let me give you, this is such an awkward plant to display, but you can see one of the leaves there. This was one of the original leaves that it came with, and just to give you an idea of a head test there. And that one, too, was one of its original leaves. They are very leathery, dark green leaves. Obviously, the very light one that you saw a moment ago, that is a relatively new leaf. Is that a pest? Yes, we will talk about pests towards the end of this video. But yeah, sorry, I'm still trying to show you everything on this plant because it is a very large. That one there, that's the newest leaf. That is the immediately preceding leaf, just to give you an idea of size. And just because this plant is ridiculous, there is also an inflorescence right there at the same time that it grew. This leaf is where that inflorescence has happened. So normally most people would be like, remove the inflorescence from that plant, otherwise you are going to have issues. I completely missed it, but it still gave me a massive leaves. But let me put it down because it is exceptionally heavy. It's also in semi-hydro, and we'll come back to the semi-hydro in just a bit. But yes, background on this is one of those plants that I saw online and I'm just like, It's got my name all over it. I love the weird leaf shape. I love the fact, I didn't even know that they got this large. I just knew that they had a very odd kind of arrow-shaped almost leaf. And I'm just like, I need to have that. And it was one that I was planning on potentially buying. And I met up with a lovely individual last year around Halloween, actually, in London for the London plant swap. And I've done a video recently from my recent visit to the plant swap, and I will kind of add it at the top for the people that haven't seen it. And this individual came up to me and just said, oh, I know that you're looking for this, and I had one of the only propagates I think I've ever had of my Esmeraldens. And if you're watching this, by the way, look at the plant, it's ridiculous. Hopefully the Esmeraldens that you got a cutting from my plant from is doing really well. And yeah, it was one of those things that the individual was just like, oh, I've got that if you want it. And I'm just like, oh yes, swapsies. So this was a swap that happened after the swap. It was one that we were just like, oh, yes, let's have this conversation. I like it. So yeah, and I think the story was that this individual had ordered two because they did two separate orders, or maybe one was sent as a gift. I don't know. But they only needed the one, so they were just like, oh, well, I'm going to get rid of one of them anyway, so do you want it and we can do the swap? And I'm just like, yes, please. So that is the kind of long and short of how this plant came into my care. And something to kind of bear in mind when we're looking at kind of growth on this one, and I'll touch on that in just a moment, but This is one that did take a while to get going. And when I say a while, it did nothing for nearly a year. Nearly a year, it did nothing. Hopefully this review, I think this plant has been with me now. It must be actually, because I think I got it just after Halloween, and we are just after Halloween now. So this has been with me at least almost up to a year, if not an exact year at this point. So yeah, it didn't do very much for a very long period of time, but actually on that point, let's look at speed of growth. So speed of growth, as I was just saying, this did very little for me. I did put it in semi-hydro. I put it in the chunky semi-hydro or the coarse semi-hydro from Soil Ninja. It has always, I mean, look at those healthy roots. I think some of this might be a bit of rottage. I hadn't seen that actually, but it's still doing fine because it's sitting in some water. So I need to maybe be a bit more careful with this now coming into the more dormant season. Not that you would know by looking at that, the size of that leaf. Absolutely ridiculous, stonking ridiculous. So this leaf, and this leaf, and I think there might have been another one. Obviously you can see these ones are struggling a bit now because they are the oldest leaves. They were the first ones on there, and what happened is that it just didn't do very much. It stayed with those two leaves for a very long period of time, and it just didn't do very much. Because I had it in a clear pot that you hopefully saw, I could see that the roots were growing in. So I think, at least in my experience with this plant, I don't know if you've had different experiences with this plant, do let us all know down below. It took a beat to get used to it. And I don't remember what media this was in. I it might have been around the time when I was starting to be a bit more specific about the way that I've received these plants on my plant care app. If that is the case, I should have a record of it and I should be able to add it somewhere from editing basically. But yeah, it didn't do very much at that stage. So I don't understand. Everybody was just like, this is growing super fast. I don't understand. Mine's not doing very much at all. Like, I think I've got a dud. What's happening here? And everybody was just like, just be a bit patient. So that leaf, this leaf, this leaf, and whilst I whack myself with all the leaves, and that leaf all happened, so at least 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves all happened in the span of about 6 months. So speed of growth now, what does that mean for speed of growth? Benchmarking this against the golden pothos, where a golden pothos might be growing 2 or 3 leaves in the summer in my collection on its growing stem, this would give me a leaf this size, which usually takes time, within about a month and a half. So 1 leaf every month and a half. And considering that we're now in November and already the conditions in here have changed drastically, and it's still pushing out something like this as well as an inflorescence, and it hasn't skipped a beat, that should tell you something. This now, when it's finally kind of doing its growing thing, for me has got to be hands down, and I think I'm going to echo a lot of people with this one of my fastest Anthuriums, by far. And for the sheer size of it as well, stunning, absolutely stunning. And I know there are different variants potentially of this. There might be a narrow form potentially, or a dark form, or there might be further hybrids with this. I don't know, I don't have any experience of those kind of forms or hybrids personally, but I know some of you may have purchased them. If you have and you want to share your experiences, please do so down below. I'd be really curious to get introduced to something new that is a nigrolaminum Gigi. I don't also know, I'm not 100% sure if this is a species or a hybrid. I would imagine with the name Gigi on it, it might be a hybrid, I would imagine. Not entirely sure. But yes, relatively fast for an Anthurium. And now ease of propagation. And let me bring it up so you can kind of see it a bit closer. So hopefully you can see that growing stem there. I am not going to lie, obviously, I have not propagated this yet. I might attempt this at some point. However, the one thing I will say, there's got some decent aerial roots that are happening there. However, the node is very, very, very tight. At least on my one, it is very, very tight. So trying to get a clean cut out of this, unless you're doing like a top cut, trying to get a clean cut out of this might be tricky. It might be one of those things that you need like a blade or a scalpel, something to do a clean horizontal cut. This is almost, I would almost compare this to the philodendron, bilietiae. The bilietiae, is it the bilietiae? Yes, the bilietiae, sorry, I'm looking at my bilietiae back there. The bilietiae has got very tight internodal spaces, and that is the one thing that people are saying, especially people that maybe want to propagate something like a variegated bilietiae, that it's very, very hair-raising trying to get that cut in order to propagate. This would be kind of similar. So in that respect, I would imagine this is probably not the easiest plant to get a propagate from, but the rate that the roots on this grew, even when the leaves weren't growing, was insane. So I would imagine if you can get the cutting and you've at least propagated some anthuriums like that before, you should be able to propagate this relatively easily, I would say, at that stage, as long as you can get the cutting. I might be wrong if you've had different experiences. As I said, I've not done it yet with my plant. This is just me assuming based on what I'm seeing on the plant, but I would imagine you'll get some explosive root growth potentially after you propagate it, if it's anything like what I've experienced with this plant, but maybe not as much leaf growth. But after it gets enough rootage in the actual pot, you should then be able to start seeing it size up quite nicely and relatively fast, again, relatively fast for an anthurium. So availability with this one is an interesting one because, as I said, this is one that I have seen time and time again on international sellers' websites. So I think I've seen this, I definitely have seen this on the Equigenera website. I think I've seen this on the Tropicals. I don't know if that's still what it's called. The Tropicals website, I've seen it on those types of websites. I have maybe seen it on some local sellers, online sellers, usually that will have a slightly harder to find plants, probably nothing at the size of even the plant that I got with those slightly smaller leaves, but it was there. Now, pricing wise is an interesting one with this one because I don't think from international sellers this, at least in the recent year or two, has ever been in the triple digits. It may have been in the mid towards high double digits. I would imagine, considering how many people have bought this now, again, the easy propagation that I was talking about before might be hindering some of this. The price of this, I would imagine, has probably dropped a bit. Is it going to drop drastically? I don't know, because I don't know how many people are aware of this plant or even want this plant, because it is beautiful. It does grow massive leaves. I mean, I like a kooky looking plant as much as the next person, but this type of leaf shape might not be for everybody, but it does, I do like it. I personally like it, but it might not be for everybody. But to be fair, within the year of having it, the fact that I've finally got an inflorescence from it, has it got pollen yet? No, but when it does, I will be picking some of this to maybe see about hybridizing in the future. But by and large, I would say this might drop a bit in price, but I still think there's a lot of people, the ones that do actually want to get this plant, would probably be willing to spend a bit of money on it. Probably not in the triple digits, but it is one that I think people are still looking for potentially, so I don't think the price is going to drop too much more than what it is now anytime soon. But we're in 2024. I do keep this availability, and I talk a bit about prices here, but I think we are well past the craziness that we saw during lockdowns in 2020, but it's nice to put things into context, and it's a great time to be a houseplant collector at the moment because it's a hell of a lot more affordable than what it used to be. But coming into pests with this one, and you saw when I was mentioning a moment ago, I was actually going to say I've really not really struggled too much with pests on this one. There might possibly possibly, let me see if I can bring it in and you might be able to see, hopefully it's not getting blown too much. Can you see some of that lighter veination that is happening in there? I think this has had thrips at some point. Did it knock back the plant or even the leaf in any way or form? You can be the judge of that. It's absolutely fine. It is absolutely fine. I think some of these older leaves maybe have had similar situations. Probably not as significant as this, because as I always say about things like thrips when it comes to anthuriums, this kind of soft leaf stage when it's still emerging before it's fully hardened off is going to be your riskiest season. But yeah, no, completely fine. Completely fine. So yes, potentially, at least from my experience, thrips is one to look out for this. Again, based on my experience, is it going to decimate the leaf or the plant? Probably not, if you've got a sizable specimen, potentially. And then mealybugs. You saw me before, when I noticed a bug on there before, it was a mealybug, because, of course, it's a mealybug in my space. Their mealybugs can play with my mealybugs. Merch down below if you're interested. But yeah, it is one that you'll see pests around it, maybe on it, but does it really cause it much stress or any real issues? In my experience, no. This is a plant that just keeps on keeping on, so it's okay. But let's talk accessories and care for this one. So I'm going to bring this up again so you might be able to see. It does have the smallest of jankiest support sticks on there, just purely to keep it a bit more upright, because otherwise this isn't one that gets very, very top heavy. The leaves are sizable. I've said this a few times. I mean, this is the most awkward video I've had to film in terms of leaf size. But that would be good to kind of keep it there. Does this need a moss pole? I mean, you can give it a moss pole. Does it desperately need it? At least in our, in household condition, probably not. I am growing it in here. So in my conservatory, if you're just joining for the first time, I generally have relatively high humidity. I might as well be in a terrarium, really, because at low humidity in this space, in the winter, for instance, it drops down to 80. Maybe 75 at a push. And if I've not got the dehumidifier running, which I don't overnight when I'm asleep, it can jump up to 90% humidity. So I am aware that that's not everybody's condition. So, and because I have not grown this in regular household humidity, I wouldn't know to tell you for a fact what it would do like in regular household humidity. But by looking at how leathery and thick these leaves are, correct me if I'm wrong, and if you've grown this in household humidity, I don't think this would have too many issues. Would you maybe be seeing a few more pests potentially? Maybe, but at the same time, I've talked about pests before. It doesn't just necessarily mean just because it doesn't have humidity that it would have more pests, because you can still get loads of pests in a high humid environment like what I've got here. Obviously, I am growing this within a semi-hydro situation, so I've got kind of what would be considered kind of chunky pon. And I do use a clear pot. Obviously, the problem with clear pots, if they're getting loads of light, you'll get things like algae, which is what I'm getting on here. But I can see it quite clearly. I have put some extra aeration holes in there, but, and I've talked about this before, about certain other types of anthuriums, if they've got thinner roots for an anthurium or medium size or nice chunky roots. This one, at least from what I can see, is decent chunky roots. Chunky towards medium sized roots. So very, very good. And I always find that those types of anthuriums tend to do a lot better. They're a lot more forgiving. Think about things like the clarinervium. The clarinervium is a reason why a lot of people always say if you're starting off with anthuriums and you want to experiment a bit more, go with something like a clarinervium. I've had mixed experiences with mine, but it's because those roots are quite thick and chunky, and it can be quite forgiving in terms of its watering because of that. So yes, this one is one that doesn't need an awful lot of special care, but I mean, anything extra that you can give this is never, the plant isn't going to hate you for it. So it would be something that it would probably appreciate quite a bit. Obviously it does well as I said, in semi-hydro for me. I would imagine it would do so for other people. Would this do well in soil? I think it would do fine in soil. I'm assuming quite a few of you out there, if you've got this plant, you've probably grown this in soil. I know there's at least a handful of kind of regular viewers, and I'm hoping you might all pipe up down below that have got this plant, and we've had similar conversations about how quickly it grows and all these things and the conditions. But yes, I would go as far as saying that this is not a particularly needy Anthurium, at least in my experience, in my care, within my collection. But coming into some final thoughts for this one, I mean, overall, let me start, before I go off on tangents, let me start as I usually start and say, knowing what I know now about this plant, if I did not own it, would I purchase this? Hands down, 100%, I would like to have this in my collection all the time. It is super, super, super easy to take care of. This is one of my Anthuriums that is feral, and people that have been here for a while know that I like my feral plants, and that is just plants that I can kind of plug and play. I don't have to hover over them. They will just do their own thing and bring out stunning new leaves like this without me having to do too much about it. That's just been my experience. But yes, 100% I would want this in my collection if I didn't have it. This would also be one of the 10 plants that I might potentially return into a burning building to take it out. But the flip side of that is that's because I love this plant as much as I do, and I would be very sad to see it go. At the same time, the flip side of that would be I maybe wouldn't go into a burning building to pick this plant up, because as long as I can replace it, and it's not the easiest thing to find, but it's not the hardest thing to find, and based on my experience and what everybody else is saying, I can probably get it to a size that is quite sizable in very little time at all. So would I risk my life for something that I can replace and get quite large quite quickly? Maybe not, but I do love it, so I probably would. But in terms of score, so 0 being the worst, 10 being the best, in terms of an Anthurium, and I'll give this a score in terms of a houseplant, this is a solid 9 for me. Would I go up to a 10? Maybe a 9 or a 10. I really, really, really enjoy growing this plant. Really, really, more so. I kind of thought that I might like this, but I didn't quite grasp quite how much I was going to like this plant. And it is one that obviously comes up with the tiniest little bit of a leaf, and then it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, and I'm just like, oh, wow. I am very, very curious to see maximum leaf size on this, and I might check it online. And as I said, I think it might be a hybrid. I don't think I'm going to get a lot of, like, if it isn't a hybrid, maybe if it isn't a hybrid, I might get some in the wild shots of this plant to see the size that it might be. I would imagine if I can't find the nigrolaminum Gigi, I might be able to find the nigrolaminum plant in nature to see what it might look like and its final size, because I would imagine this will max out at some point. I would imagine. I don't think this is one of the ones that's meant to get absolutely gigantic leaves. I might be wrong. But yes, overall, one of my top plants for sure, and I would be remiss if I did not do a review on this plant, purely on the fact that super easy as an Anthurium, not particularly difficult to find. You do need to do a bit of research. Pricing wise, it has gone down a bit. It's not going to be the cheapest Anthurium that you're going to get, but as long as you want to get something a bit more interesting and you're willing to spend a tiny bit more, this will be a good one. But yeah, by and large, a really, really cool plant. But yes, as I've said throughout this video, share your experiences down below. Let us all know what your experiences have been, if you've got this plant, or any questions that you might have if you're thinking about getting this plant down below. Hopefully there's going to be a few of us, not just me, answering some of those questions. And yeah, let's make this a repository of information, as I usually try to do with these review videos. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.